Hey churches, I'm here with Don Pardoe today. Don is the worship and outreach pastor at First Baptist Church in Bullard, and he's been gracious enough to take some time with me today. And I thought this would be a great conversation to talk a little bit, mostly about your role as a worship pastor here at the church, because I know that's a question a lot of churches have today, is regarding worship. But tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I've been in ministry about probably over 45 years now, full time, but it's been kind of a different form. For the first 25 years, I was in full-time ministry on the road in Christian music, and then for the last about 15 or so years, I've been in local church ministry.
So yeah, people, if they don't know you, you were in a music group called Glad for a while, and then you were with some other touring opportunities.
We lived in Nashville for 9 years, and in that period of time, I was with a couple of groups on the road full time, and then when we joined Glad, they're based out of Northern Virginia, so we moved to Northern Virginia and lived there for 7 years before we moved back to East Texas.
And how long have you been here at Bullard?
5 years. 5 years this month.
5 years. Mm-hmm. And so your musical abilities all over the place, but your love is the piano?
I do. I love piano. I started when I was like a toddler, just climbing up to the piano and playing stuff that I heard by ear, and it developed over time. And so I lead worship from the piano in our services.
Yeah, and I love it. And, I noticed that the piano's not always in the same spot. Sometimes you're in the middle, sometimes you're more to the side. Mm-hmm. Is that part of your philosophy of just kind of keeping things fresh? Or
I think it's just part of who I am. If you're in this office next week, the desk may be over here on this wall. I just like to change things all the time.
Okay.
And so I get bored with it being in one place, and I think it's good for your church, your congregation, to see things moving around and things different every once in a while.
Yeah, and that's important, because I think sometimes in worship can become, we do 3 songs, we sit down, we stand up, we have a sermon, we do a response, we go home. Mm-hmm. So a philosophy of worship's a lot more than that, though, right? So.
Right.
What would you say is maybe your overarching philosophy of what worship really is?
Well, I think worship is engaging people with not only the worship at church that happens, an hour or so every week, but I think you agree with me that worship is not something, it's not a musical style, but it's a lifestyle. And it's something that we do every day of the week. When there are no instruments, sometimes when we're office, or whatever, you're worshiping with your work, you're worshiping with your lifestyle. And so I think what I like to see, what we do on Sunday, it's not the end all, it's not the time of worship so much, but we're using that period of time on Sunday to help people engage more with God in a personal level, see the relational side of it more, mm-hmm. and so that they can actually use that every day of their life and learn to worship. So I see it more of more of a start than the finish.
Yeah.
In what we do here on Sunday, and so and with us at First Baptist, we do a variety of, it's a multi-generational approach, because, that's the way the church is. The church has a variety of ages, so it's also an opportunity to have people come together, and you're doing a variety of music so that it teaches your congregation that it's about us together. It's not, worship is not meant to segment the church into age groups. I feel it's unfortunate when we do that sometimes. We do have a philosophy here that excellence honors God and inspires people. So regardless of what style we're doing, we want to make sure that we do the best we can, excellence. And I think sometimes even the young people like older style of music if it's done well. It's not necessarily that they don't like older music, it's just that it's not done well. And so we try the best we can to do that.
Yeah, every church should, excellence is always relative to what you have, right? You know, so, you know, you may be in a smaller church and you don't have a worship pastor or anything, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't do as well as we can with what we have.
Yes.
So one of the things that I love about when I worship with you guys, the posture and attitude of the people that are on stage with you. There's always a sense of just presence and joy. Is that by design? Is that something you guys talk about, what you're trying to communicate from the platform to the rest of the congregation?
We do. In our rehearsal times, we don't just spend time on the music, but we talk a lot about, you know, how you're presenting it and the humility that is necessary in order to engage with people. Because if you don't have that approach, so often it makes a congregation think you're up there on the platform and we're out here, and more observing rather than engaging in worship. And so we do try to keep that in mind, and we pray about it, and it's very important to do that.
Yeah. Wow, that's something that I just always stands out whenever I'm here, and I just notice how engaged the people on the platform are. It makes me feel more engaged.
That's awesome.
So I love that about it. So let's kind of maybe switch tones, because you've done a lot. You've helped out with a lot of different things. Let's say a church is a small church, and they're struggling with their worship, and they don't know what to do. They don't have hardly anything on the inside. What advice would you give to a church that just doesn't have much to work with as far as leading worship on a Sunday morning with songs and all of that?
I think it's like what you said, is that you work with what you have to make it the best it can be. And I've always believed that good musicians and creative people are attracted to good music and creativity that's inspiring. And so even if you start very small, but you really try to do your best to make that creative and engaging and inspiring, it will bring those people to the surface that maybe you didn't even know about that were out there. I found that, like, when we started here at FBC Bullard, they had been through a lot of transition, and we didn't have a whole lot to work with, but we just started with what we had, and we did our best to make that the best it could be. And then people came forward and they would say, well, I play guitar, or I sing, or whatever they do, and it began to grow to that point where I didn't know every Sunday if I was going to have a certain instrument or a certain person to sing or whatever. It grew to now where we have people in rotation so that you don't have to do it every Sunday. But I think it's just starting with what you have. And even if you don't have much, if you just have a guitar, just a piano, or you use some of the resources that are available with some of the tracks that are available, and you start there with an idea that you're going to grow from there. You'd be surprised at what can happen. And even going into smaller communities or smaller churches, if you have that approach, it's amazing what you see happen over time, and it just takes time.
That's a great piece of advice. So if you want to have people who are creative and people who have that artsy side to them, the musical art side, then you've got to create an atmosphere that makes them want to be there. And so that's really good advice. The same thing is true if you want to have people who love God's word. You've got to create an atmosphere that teaches the word, right? So that's a great piece of advice. I think that would be
you've
really
got to make it. They've got to, when they come to worship, they want to know it's important to you. If you have the approach like, this is just what we have, it's the best it can be, then a lot of people don't necessarily feel encouraged to be part of something like that, you know.
Yeah. There's one other thing. I think this is important because I've heard some pastors talk about the importance of it. One of the things that you guys have done too is your stage stays pretty clean. Like, you just don't have a lot of stuff running up there. People don't leave their water bottles up there, all that kind of stuff. Why is that such an important element in do you think, or is it an important element?
I think it is an important element because you don't want anything to distract from what you're doing, and it's going to be if someone, and somebody observes that up there everything's a mess, then that kind of gives them the same impression of what you're doing, whether you mean to or not. And the one thing you mentioned, our stage is a little different. We just had it recently remodeled about 3 or 4 years ago. The old traditional architecture, whatever, design, there's so many rails and boundaries and borders between the people on the platform and the people. And I guess there was a reason for that years ago. But what we wanted to do with our platform, one of the things was to take all those down,
Right.
so that it feels more like you're part of the congregation and you don't have all these rails and all these things in front of you saying, we're here and you're there,
Yeah.
that kind of thing. You can't always do that, but as much as possible, if you look at your platform, there's probably a lot of things on there that you're not using that don't need to be there, so just take it off. It just makes it, like you say, cleaner and more engaging, and makes people feel like they're more a part of what you're doing.
Yeah, because it's all about, I mean, there is an atmosphere to worship. I mean, in our hearts, in our daily life, but there's also the atmosphere of actually recognizing that there's a holy God in this place. And I think that's actually an important part of this. And I think it's one of those areas that maybe doesn't feel holy to talk about, but it is a holy conversation.
Right,
So
exactly.
yeah, well, great. Man, I love what you're doing here, and I'm just so appreciative. And I just love how you care about our other churches. You're always asking how you can help, and I appreciate that. And I know if someone was calling and they didn't know what to do, that they'd be more than welcome to call you.
Absolutely, for sure. We don't feel like we have all the answers. We're learning as we go, like anybody else. And you should always be learning. But we'd be happy to help anybody in any way that we can. So.
Well, fantastic. Well, Donna, I appreciate you. Thank you so much for what you do, and
Absolutely.
And thank you for sharing your skills and your knowledge with us today.
Sure.
All right, churches, we'll catch you later.